Why aren't you a Christian?
Hey everybody, thanks for checking out our video. If you see something on this channel that you like, please like the video. That really helps us out since we're a young channel. Please subscribe to the channel. Please click the bell icon for notifications. And maybe the most important thing you can do is please add your voice to the comment section. I've personally found your comments to be really enriching, even when you all disagree with me. So I'm really curious to know your thoughts. I'd love to know if anything in this video is particularly resonant with you. Let me know your reasons for your belief system that you have towards atheism or maybe towards Christianity, and let me know what you think about this video overall, especially if you want to see more content just like this. Emma Thorne is the host of this video and is the person speaking in most of the video. She's a really great YouTuber. She makes some really insightful points about atheism. I think she's a very wise person, and she makes some other really great and really entertaining videos. So please check out her channel as well. What I have on the screen right now is an awkward freeze face, and this is a way to win internet points. So I apologize. I did this a few times in the video looking back. So again, sorry Emma for capturing the awkward freeze face as often as I do in this video. I promise you 100% it's not intentional.
So just know that my intention is not to put you down for your beliefs. It is to hopefully help you understand mine.
Alright, so right away I just want to give a highlight to her perspective. I think this is a really fantastic perspective to have. She's not trying to denigrate anyone's beliefs. She's just explaining herself. I think that's a great perspective. And I'm going to give Emma one extra hoot of extra credit just for having such, I think, a really great perspective on what we should do when we talk about religion. So great way to start the video, Emma.
So why aren't you a Christian? Answer number one, I don't know, man. Why aren't you a Hindu? I'm just not. People ask the question, why aren't you a Christian, as if that's the default state of being? And I think it's a lot more valuable to ask the question, why are you a Christian? Because, hey, I love my Socrates. Every belief should be able to be defended against the question, why? And as per the Socratic method...
Okay, so this is pretty much Emma's first argument. And her argument is that, rather than saying, why are you not a Christian, a better way to approach the conversation is to say, here's my beliefs, here's why I believe what I believe, and I'm curious to know more about your beliefs. I think this is a great foundation. It's an important observation. It doesn't really make a super strong argument, so I'll probably put her hoot score for this argument somewhere in the middle. Let's give this one 3 hoots out of 5, because I think it does make a really important point.
Why aren't you a Christian? Answer number 2. I've read the Bible. Kind of a lot. People asking me this question tend to assume the opposite, and say things like, try reading the Bible. And I have. I guess because of this idea of the Holy Spirit coming upon you when you read it to help you understand. We'll worry about that later. Some Christians seem to assume that if you had read the Bible, then everything would make perfect sense and you would be a believer, but obviously there wouldn't be all the different denominations and arguments within the faith if that was true. So I read bits of the Bible growing up in religious studies classes. The only exam I've ever gotten 100% in was a religious studies class on Christianity.
Well, if that's the only test that Emma's gotten 100% in, I would say that's an indictment of the educational system. There should be way more A's doled out to somebody as well-informed as Emma Thorne.
I promise I have always been a nerd for this stuff. Everyone who thinks I just haven't read it or understood it properly, I would put money on the fact that most people who say that to me have not read as much about the Bible as I have not talked to as many scholars about the Bible as I have. When my dad became a Christian at 50 years old after a lifetime of being a staunch atheist, I gave it the old college try.
Okay, now that's actually really interesting. So I did not realize this about Emma. So it sounds like her dad was a lifelong atheist who then became a Christian much later in life. Now that sounds really interesting. I would love to hear more about that in a video. Emma, you should have your dad on, and then you guys should do an interview and talk about navigating your relationship with that religious disparity, and then also talk about the reasons that he left atheism, the reasons you're sticking with atheism. I think that could make a really great video. I would even, to sweeten the deal, I will offer you an additional 2 hoots of extra credit if you eventually make a video with your dad talking about that.
I read the Bible with all the openness of heart and mind that I have in me, and I asked questions of believers, and just nothing changed. The experience just did not make me a Christian. Read those books cover to cover, and you tend to end up with a lot more questions than answers. Speaking of which...
By the way, I'm skipping around a lot, so if you want to check out Emma's full video, I do recommend that. All right, so how to score this answer? So this is an interesting answer. I think I'm going to give this one 3 hoots out of 5 as well, because number one, I think if you honestly just read the New Testament, I think that's kind of all that anyone can ask of you. I think that's a valid point. I will say this, though. For me personally, getting to know works that sort of interpreted the New Testament for me was more valuable than just reading the New Testament. I'll give you just an example. I know it's going to sound corny, but the Chosen TV series was really interesting to watch. I really liked C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity. If you haven't read that, it's a free audiobook that you can just get for free. You can watch it for free on YouTube. Maybe I'll put that link in the comments. So I think there is utility in getting translators for the New Testament, especially if it's not resonating with you. I do want to caution against one thing. That whole thing about the Holy Spirit is supposed to move you while you're reading the New Testament. I don't know if I would take that as very literally. I think that's kind of more of a subjective experience. There are some people like me who are just not very transcendentally moved. I don't have a lot of emotionally transcendental experiences. So I just take that as a word of caution. And I think if you're really interested in getting to know the New Testament, find a good resource. Find maybe the lectures of Tim Keller. I think Tim Keller is a great lecturer. C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity, or try to find just some people in your community that you can have a really open, honest conversation with that's intellectually nourishing and spiritually actualizing. I think that's a more important thing to do. All right, but again, 3 out of 5. I think this point, her rationale makes a lot of good points here. It doesn't yet move the needle for me, but it's a very interesting argument and some good points are made.
Aren't you a Christian number 3? I just don't vibe with the Holy Book. I know that's going to be a contentious one. Before you come at me with your sick verbal karate chops.
Okay, I was at this point actually going to come at Emma with my sick verbal karate chops, but she preempted it, so I just can't do that. All right, but let's take a break from the grading of her arguments, and let's grade her karate chops at this point. All right, so let's see that karate chop again in slow motion. All right, yeah, that's a pretty good karate chop there. That is excellent form. Let's see that again one more time in slow motion. Boy, that is a good solid karate chop. I'm going to give her 1 extra hoot for that excellent form on her karate chops. All right, great job, Emma.
Like I said, I read the Bible, and the messaging of some of those stories, including some of the most important ones, are kind of the antithesis of moral goodness, in my opinion. The concept of heaven and hell is repulsive to me. I personally don't understand how any individual could be happy with the idea of going to heaven, knowing that billions of other people, most of them good, are off to hell for eternal damnation. That's sick, in my opinion.
All right, so Emma is making a really solid and important point here. I'm going to stop here because I think this is a separate argument than what she goes into next. But my first point on this is, and I dislike this argument for 2 reasons. Number one, I think we do tend to think of heaven and hell as eternal, and in our minds we sort of conceptualize that as a dimension where kind of time keeps going. It just goes on forever. So like there's still a clock on the wall, there's still a calendar counting down the days, but that time just kind of stretches out forever. I don't think that's the right way to think of time in the afterlife or time in the dimension of God, if there is such a thing. I think a better way to think of that realm of time is outside of Minkowski space-time, right? Because our universe has dimensions of space and a dimension of time where time runs in a linear forward direction. But outside of our universe, there's no reason to think that time should work the same way. So I think thinking of hell and heaven as eternal is fundamentally flawed, the way we conceptualize it. My second issue with this argument is I don't believe that hell is eternal conscious torment. There are many, many Christians who also don't believe that hell is eternally conscious torment. There's a lot of different reconciliations of hell based on how you read the Old Testament and New Testament. I think eternal conscious torment is certainly the Christian fundamentalist view, but it's not necessarily the only view. And I know Christians who are very biblical, who are very literary in the way they take the Bible, who don't believe that hell is eternal conscious torment. So another way that you could think of hell is a domain of annihilation where your soul does get burned away and then it just ceases to exist after a time. I think that's probably more likely, Another reconciliation of hell is universalism. That was advocated by Soren Kierkegaard and many others. So when you hear about universalists, that's what you're talking about with universalists. They believe that all humans will eventually be saved. And according to some universalists, essentially the work of Jesus is not done until everyone's saved. That's a big central thesis of Valentin Tomberg, who had a lot to say on this. So I think what Emma is presenting here is a very sort of primary school version of hell. It's not the version of hell that I think I believe in. It's not the version of hell that many Christians believe in. I agree this formulation does sound very cruel, and it is very cruel, but I don't think that's the way it is, and I also think it's flawed to apply our human perspective to God's judgment. I just think it's a flawed way to perceive hell. But maybe we'll get into this more. Maybe this deserves a separate video, but let's get back to Emma's arguments. But I'm going to give this video 1 hoot. I'm going to give that particular reason 1 hoot out of 5. But because a lot of people do talk about hell as eternal conscious torment and you're going to burn in hell because that gets said a lot, I'm going to bump Emma up to 2 hoots out of 5 because it's not her fault that conflation has happened.
However you slice it, the God of the Bible commits and commands genocide. He turns a lady to salt for no good reason. He was going to kill his own prophet Moses for not circumcising his son, and the whole circumcision thing in general is a bit fucking whack. Never mind killing your own favourite person for not joining in. He again nearly killed all of his followers after the Exodus. And Moses, whom God nearly killed before, had to talk him down. He sent bears to maul 42 children to death.
Okay, now this goes on for quite some time. So Emma, for the next couple of seconds here, is going to recap a lot of Old Testament stories, all of which are somewhat questionable in their own way, especially in the way that she's presenting them. Now, what I want to underscore is this is maybe the most important thing I'm going to say in this video, and it does involve a bit of a tangent, a bit of a rant. So I apologize for that. But what I do want to underscore is the original members of the Christian community in antiquity, did not take the Old Testament to be literally true. Origen of Alexandria said something in, I think, the year 200 AD. I'll put his quote on the screen right now. There were other people who agreed that the Bible shouldn't be taken literally. Augustine of Hippo in 401 AD made a statement that was very similar. We shouldn't take the Bible literally. Gregory of Nyssa in 390 AD also had a statement saying that you shouldn't take the Bible literally. Justin Martyr in 155 AD was making the argument that the Bible shouldn't be taken literally. And several other people have said similar things. Clement of Alexandria in 200 AD, Ambrose of Milan in 378 AD, Irenaeus of Lyons in 180 AD. So we should just stop debating sort of the literal issues of the Old Testament. I just think nobody's interested in that. Most people don't believe that there was originally, for instance, an Adam and an Eve, and that everything in the Old Testament is meant to be taken literally. Most people don't believe that. So I think debating that back and forth is problematic at best. Now, it is important to note that historically, especially in the 20th century, Christianity did take a turn where Old Testament words were being taken much more literally. And this is fascinating. I did a really deep dive into this, and this is, again, maybe the most important thing that I'm going to say in this video. But basically what happened was there was this push in the late 19th century and early 20th century to start advocating that the Bible was to be interpreted literally. And I'm not even talking about biblical inerrancy. Biblical inerrancy is a more broad ideology. In fact, I'm talking about the verbal and plenary inspiration school of thought of Scripture. So that means that every part and every word of the Bible is divinely preordained by God and is meant to be in a specific way. So this really culminated at the end of the 19th century, at the beginning of the 20th century. And this is really fascinating when you get into it. There was this Niagara Creed in the year 1890 that codified that we have to have a verbal and plenary inspiration perspective on the Old Testament, meaning every part, every word of the New Testament is divinely ordained. So why did this happen? You know, it's kind of interesting. If there were these this set of 90 essays that were put out by these oil magnates. These were people who were insanely rich off oil money, of all things. They put out 90 essays in 12 volumes, and they promised a lot of money to a lot of different churches. And I'm talking about Milton Stewart and Lyman Stewart were the two brothers who were both very, very rich oil tycoons who put all this money into churches if they advocated for the verbal and plenary inspiration perspective on Scripture. So that really fascinates me. I don't know why these two oil tycoons got involved in Christianity, but that's really what changed Christianity from being kind of the more broad perspective of antiquity and the more metaphorical perspective on the Old Testament to being a very literal, very verbal perspective on the Old Testament. And that only happened during, again, very recent, very modern history. It probably culminated again in 1978 with the Chicago Statement of Biblical Inerrancy. So, and that also further codified that the Bible should be taken literally. So here's my point. How do I take this argument from Emma? I would say this is a bad argument because it sort of reinforces that we should be interpreting the Old Testament in this verbal and plenary formulation. So I disagree with that thesis. I disagree with that presupposition. That will probably make me knock it down to 2 hoots out of 5 for this argument. But because it's not really Emma's fault, I think I'm going to bump her back up to 3 hoots out of 5. And the reason why it's not her fault, because many Christian fundamentalists ascribe to this way of thinking about the Old Testament, that every word is literally true. That wasn't the case for early Christianity and antiquity. We just kind of got away from that for some reason in the 19th and 20th centuries. And now we're kind of stuck in that real dichotomy. If you believe the Bible, then you have to believe the Old Testament, you have to believe Adam and Eve, and you can't take any of that metaphorically. You have to believe that it's literally true. I think that's an unhealthy perspective, and I think we'd all be more intellectually and spiritually nourished if we just got rid of that whole presupposition and agreed that the Old Testament should be taken metaphorically. All right, so 3 hoots out of 5. Hopefully that rationale makes sense. Let's get back to the video. Sorry for the long tirade.
Why am I not a Christian? Answer number 4. The contradictions in teaching and in morals. Following on from number 3, there is not a consistency in moral teachings in Christianity because they rely on the Bible, which, as I so often harp on about, is a selection of ancient texts by different authors with different purposes and different beliefs. And different agendas. Jesus says that he is not here to change God's message. And yet he teaches compassion for one's enemies. Whereas, as previously discussed, God seemed to really take a hatchet even to his friends if he caught a whiff of dissent. There's a very confusing argument about the Old Covenant no longer being valid, despite, again, what Jesus says about not changing anything about the law. And yet it's still very important that we learn and follow most of the 10 Commandments. Just not the ones that are obviously silly. Just the ones that tend...
All right, so Emma makes a lot of really solid points here. It was kind of a big rant with a lot of little stuff in it that I could probably try to respond to individually, but I think it sort of applies to the things that I've already said. Now, just a couple of quick caveats. Number 1, I don't know that there's so much disagreement between different Christian sects about what to take from the Old Testament. My understanding is the 10 Commandments is still what you follow in Christianity, and then we take a lot of the other rules in the Old Testament, like you can't mix different fabrics, and you have to eat kosher and all that other stuff, and we sort of put that aside. I guess the exception to this, where there is a sect that does that, would be the Messianic Jews, but I feel like they do that for cultural reasons and for ethnic reasons and historical reasons. So again, I'm not really sure that there's a whole lot of argumentation on that point. I think most people follow the 10 Commandments. I kind of think of Jesus' ideology as being sort of distilled in the Sermon on the Mount. I think Jesus had basically 3 big lessons. Number 1 is sort of the lesson of humility. Number 2 is the lesson of love. God loves everyone sort of equally, that kind of egalitarian love. And number 3, the doctrine of forgiveness, which is kind of where you have to admit that we as humans are flawed and we need God's divine help to be more righteous. I tend to gravitate towards those 3 ideas a lot. I tend to not dwell a lot on the Old Testament. I did look into the Old Testament a little bit. I started reading it and I was like, yeah, I don't jive with a lot of the rules that are in here. And then I read Peter's reconciliation in Galatians, where he basically says, yeah, Jesus' sinless existence is what completed the old covenant, and now there's a new covenant. So to me, that sort of makes sense. To me, there's not a lot of contradiction there. But I think Emma makes a lot of persuasive points here. So I'm going to give this argument maybe, let's give this another 4 hoots out of 5, because I've given her a couple of 3s, and maybe I was being a little stingy beforehand. And also, I know I'm very much in fear of Emma's karate chops. So I'll give this one 4 hoots out of 5.
Similarly, but slightly more nerdily, the contradictions between the texts and within the texts. I'm not going to go into massive detail because you can check out a video that I already made right here, which is a sort of beginner's guide to contradictions within Bible texts. I think it's really fun and interesting, and because I am a good bean, I included most of the apologetic explanations for a lot of them and why I don't think that they work. It is just a fact. No one with a functioning conscience and a shred of logic can deny that there are contradictions between the books of the Bible.
Alright, so I haven't watched Emma's other video. Maybe I'll go check that out. But I don't particularly find a lot of concern in discrepancies that I find in the New Testament. Let me just give you one example of one that kind of sticks out in my mind. Bart Ehrman makes a big deal about how the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke all say that Jesus died, I think, on the day before the Passover. And the Gospel of John says that Jesus died essentially on the day of preparation for Passover. That to me doesn't really move the needle that much for me. And here's why. I graduated a lot of years ago, and just for fun, I had a conversation with my girlfriend at the time. We're still friends. And I said, what day of the week did I graduate? And how many people were there? And then who was there? And so we went through all the details, and a lot of our details didn't match up. Now, this to me doesn't mean that I didn't graduate. So those discrepancies in the Bible, at least in the New Testament, the ones I've read, are not that persuasive to me. Now, again, early Christians did not believe in biblical inerrancy. There was sort of an acknowledgement that discrepancies in the Bible exist. And in fact, Origen and a lot of other early Christian thinkers said, that's fine. I think these discrepancies are a chance to sort of invite more philosophic introspection and more pensiveness about the Bible. So they really treated those discrepancies as a very important thing in the Bible. So I think the new fundamentalist perspective is that you should ignore discrepancies or just gloss over them. I don't think that's a good way to be, but I also don't think that the discrepancies are very significant. Also, I'll put up just one quote from Bruce Metzger, who acknowledges that although there are a lot of different variants in how the New Testament can be read and different copies of the New Testament and different discrepancies within the New Testament, none of these really change Christian theology to me. For instance, I think the example that Emma gave doesn't really change my theology at all. I think Christian theology stays essentially the same, even if you kind of gloss over the discrepancies or even if you take them very seriously. So that to me doesn't necessarily move the needle that much. I'm going to give that argument 2 hoots out of 5. Maybe I'm being a little stingy, but I do think it's been addressed elsewhere pretty well.
I've never understood why this isn't more of a consideration for religious people. The fact that one's religion is largely and most likely influenced by the region of the world you were born in and/or your parents' faith. Do every other Christian, Muslim, and Buddhist equally think that they are so lucky to have been born into a country where the majority religion is the one true religion? Like, phew, won that lottery. You can't all be right. I've spoken to the loveliest, most well-meaning and intelligent Christians who say things like, I actually pulled away from the church, and I studied, and I came to it and was born again of my own accord later. They just always happened to be born again into almost or exactly the same faith that they started with, that they grew up with, that is the majority religion in their country. The bias towards that religion just doesn't seem to bother anyone.
Very excellent point again from Emma. This point does not work on me super well because I am definitely not within the religious tradition that I was born into. So I am definitely in a different religion than what I was born in. But it does apply to several other religions. It actually applies least well to Christianity. And the reason for that is because Christianity is actually the most ethnically diverse of any religion. For almost every religion, there's essentially 90-95% of the religion is based on a single ethnicity. Christianity, the biggest ethnicity that's represented in Christianity, I think is only around 20 or 25%. Just to make sure I'm not misquoting anything, I'll put those statistics on the screen. But Christianity is actually the only religion that has some population, some indigenous population, I should say, on every populated continent than there is. So on every populated continent, there is a significant indigenous presence of Christianity. I find that to be very interesting. Now, this argument doesn't move the needle that much for me for another reason, which is because if you kind of think about it, ideas tend to spread slowly. So, like for instance, electricity is a fact. Electromagnetism exists. You can do interesting work by harnessing electrical energy, and that's really interesting. And it's based on fundamental truths of physics. But electricity didn't start getting used all around the world all at once, right? It developed in one area, then it spread to other areas, then it spread even more slowly to some other areas, and it's still not all the way around the world. So, if an idea is spreading slowly, I guess the question is, does that make that idea less true? For me, the answer is no to that question. So I would reject this argument, but I think it's a good argument. Let's give this argument 2 hoots out of 5.
Maybe I should consider the fact that there are thousands of other religions with just as long and ancient a history as mine. You spent all that time studying the Bible and Christian apologetics. How much time did you give to the Tripitaka or the Tanakh?
This is a good reminder for me to mention that I do like a lot of different religions. If you'd ever want a video comparing different religions, I'd love to provide that. I read the Kitab-i-Aqdas, which is the main text of the Baha'i faith, the Kitab-i-Aqdas. I'm probably mispronouncing that. And I read the Guru Granth Sahib of Sikhism, both excellent books. Neither one struck me as particularly divinely inspired, but I did like both books. I liked reading them. And I'm a big fan of Sikhism, and I'm a big fan of the Baha'i faith. There's a lot of other religions that I've gotten into. I've read a lot of texts, the Hindu Vedas. I've read some Buddhist stuff throughout my life. So I have read other texts, and I would recommend that quite strongly.
Pitaka, or the Tanakh, or the Veda. Really, it harkens back to my very first point. Why Christian at all? A lot of Christians, call me a gosh dang fool for being an atheist. Often gleefully pointing out how silly I'll feel when I die and I go to hell.
Is Emma Thorne going to go to hell? I mean, I would argue no. I don't know who goes to hell. I don't even know that I'm not going to hell. But I don't think Emma is going to go to hell. But I do think this. You have to, I really think, read texts. You have to seek intellectual nourishment. You have to get to know and study the universe. And you have to do it with a humble and open heart. So I think sometimes it seems to me like Emma has all the answers, and I think that's not always great. You should always be humble, but I don't know that. I don't know Emma very well, and this is just a very limited perception. So, but I would definitely think that it's not fair if Emma goes to hell, and I don't think that's going to happen. I think, just, read and study and seek out the universe and do it with a humble mindset, and no one can ask anything else of you.
I'm not a Christian because I don't believe in God. It sounds pretty obvious. It's a pretty fundamental requirement to being a Christian. But I don't believe in God, and you need to believe in God to believe in the divinity... Something else Christians don't totally agree on, of Jesus, and his dying for our sins. That is the main thing you must believe to be a Christian. For a lot of reasons, I don't believe in God. Chiefly because there is no evidence for him. There are arguments people make about some event or matter that originated the universe, and I kind of think that's just being tricksy and trying to do a gotcha. Because if something we don't know about or understand was at the beginning, I consider that a science we don't yet understand.
So this gets to the meat of most religion versus science debates, which is, do we have explanation for everything that we see in the universe? Now, I don't find this debate particularly nourishing. I think this is a debate about causation and mechanism, and I'm not saying that's not something interesting to dive into, but we should expect science to come up with naturalistic explanations for everything that we see in the universe. That doesn't mean that we have to have those explanations now, but I think everything that we see in the universe, we should be able to ask how questions and answer those questions through the sciences. To me, religion is fundamentally very different, and this is why I think religion and science can be complementary. Because religion is about why-type questions, not how-type questions. So, how did the sun get here? How did the earth form? How did the universe form? How did the Big Bang happen? Those are all questions of how. Those are all very legitimately within the realm of science questions. Those are all things that we should seek out explanations for naturalistically. The why-type questions is like, well, what is the ultimate purpose, teleologically speaking? Why are we ultimately here? I think that's a different set of questions, and that's why I think of science and religion in ways that are very complementary to each other. All right, so how do I rate this argument that Emma's giving? I would say I probably rate it as a 2 out of 5 because I'm just sort of not very excited by the whole, well, I either know where the universe came from or I don't know where the universe came from. The only really solid explanation that I've heard for the creation of the universe without the involvement of God is from Lawrence Krauss. It's an interesting argument. I probably won't go into it. But again, it's sort of irrelevant. And here's another explanation of why it's irrelevant and why you can divide science and religion into how type questions in the realm of the sciences and why type questions in the realm of religion. Because if there is an omniscient, omnipotent God, then we should not expect to see God's handiwork, meaning we should not expect to look around the universe and see the fingerprints of God. Another way to explain that is God is not going to leave evidence of God's monkeying around in the universe in existence. In other words, we wouldn't find evidence that says that, okay, clearly science didn't have anything to do with this process. Clearly it's all due to God. I think there are some interesting arguments on either side. I don't think any of them are in this video, so I'm going to give Emma a slightly lower score for this. But I think the debate about causation of the universe is a debate for the sciences, and the debate about purpose for the universe is a conversation for religion. So that's my 2 cents on that. I know that was a bit of a long-winded explanation, but again, I've written a lot about this in some of my other works. I'd be happy to quote those or cite those, or maybe I'll put some other quotes in the video if I find some that are particularly insightful. If not, I'll put something in the comment section referring you to some other questions that you can ask and answer about those topics. All right, let's go on to the next argument.
Number 8, I believe the most important Bible stories are ahistorical, meaning not historical fact. The creation story and Adam and Eve, impossible.
All right, so I won't talk too much about this because I think we've already sort of addressed this earlier on, that I think most Christians don't believe in the Old Testament as a literal collection of stories, and the historicity of those stories is therefore not important to the theology, and hasn't been for probably many, many centuries. Unfortunately, again, that whole set of issues was resurrected in the 19th and 20th centuries and kind of came back in a vengeance with Christian fundamentalism. But most Christians, as Emma points out, don't believe in the historicity of those stories. I will say this, Origen said something that I find very helpful, which is you should look at the Old Testament using Jesus as a lens. I haven't read the Old Testament extensively. I'm not an Old Testament scholar, so I don't want to speak too much about that, but I think that's a useful idea. Let me give you just one small example. I used to, as an atheist, say that the story of the Jewish liberation from slavery in Egypt didn't make any sense at all for many reasons, and here was one of the reasons that I often gave. One of the reasons was, to me, the angel of death doesn't need you to paint your doorpost to tell what your ethnicity is. Like, I envisioned that conversation happening between the angel of death and God saying, okay, you got to go down and you got to kill the Egyptians, kill their firstborns and don't do anything to the Jews. And then death was like, okay, well, can you have the Jews paint their doorposts so I can tell which one's which? I mean, I would have been like, as God, I would have been like, dude, is this your first day on the job? You don't know how to tell somebody's ethnicity without like them painting the doorpost? I mean, it doesn't make any sense, right? So it wasn't until later that I sort of digested that argument with a fresh lens, sort of thinking of it like with Jesus as an analogy, that it came to make much more sense. For instance, the bondage that we have is not the bondage of slavery literally, it's the bondage of sin. And then what happens when you suffer through a life of sin? The wage that you get is death. And how do you escape that death? You escape it through the blood of the Lamb, the blood of the sacrifice, or the sacrifice of Jesus. So to me, then everything kind of becomes crystal clear. It's no longer just a story that may or may not have happened in Egypt about the Jews being enslaved. It's now a story that resonates in modern times with such more poignancy. So that's the way I sort of look at things in the Old Testament. Many of them I still don't understand, but at least some new things now make sense to me because I sort of understand the idea of using Jesus as a lens. As far as Emma goes making this argument, I think we gave the other one maybe a little bit of a generous score, so let's give this one, I think, 2 hoots out of 5.
To my next point. Number 9.
All right, well, I'm going to stop the video there, but that was such a nice little singing audition that Emma did that I figured I would keep that in. Because the video is getting kind of long at this point, I'm going to stop the video here and not go into too much other stuff, but check out Emma Thorne's other videos, and also let me know what you think of this video. If this is a format that you like, let me know, and I'll try to make more of these. If there are other atheists that you think I should react to, let me know and I'll make more of those. If you think I should get more into debunking people on the Christian fundamentalist side, I think that'd be really interesting to do. There are definitely some voices people who purport to speak for Christianity overall, who are probably not valid speakers for Christianity. So let me know, and I'll tackle some other videos. But let me know what you think of this format. I will put Emma's overall score on the screen now. But again, I think Emma did a really great job stating some arguments. I don't think for me this changed my perspective in terms of my own personal reluctant belief. But I think we had an interesting exchange of ideas, and perhaps that's the most important thing. You should be able to express your beliefs in a way that welcomes other people to weigh in on your beliefs, that encourages other people to think more deeply about their own beliefs, and encourages discussion in general. So hopefully I've done that with this video as well. I hope you'll check out our other stuff on the channel. Please like this video. If you find something on the channel that you enjoy, please share it. We're a very young channel, so please like and subscribe to the channel. Click the bell icon for notifications. And please comment on this video to let me know what you think about Emma's thoughts or my own rebuttals of Emma or other arguments that you heard in this conversation. I hope you all really have a wonderful day, and I hope you learned something new from this video. I've really enjoyed spending the time with you all during these last few videos, and I so much appreciate the conversations, and I really, really appreciate the support. As always, have a really wonderful day.